You are listening to Spiritual PTSD. I'm Damian Skinner, a recovering exorcist and Christian. The stories you are about to hear are all first-hand true life encounters I experienced as a child and later teen exorcist and miracle worker. As a tongue-talking, spirit-slaying, word and faith child minister, I personally performed well over 75 exorcisms before the age of 18. Many of these stories are horrific in nature, many hilarious, but all are embarrassing. This podcast is for adults only, as these stories are disturbing, and I do like to say the word fuck a lot. Before we start this episode, I do want to give an additional warning that in this particular podcast, I am talking about masturbating. I talk about it pretty open. At times it gets crass. I try not to, but it is the way I communicate. This also is a longer one because I'm really just kind of setting the stage around sexuality and my childhood in the church. There's really just a few specific points, but this is a general understanding of the environment I grew up in and how that transitioned into puberty and what an absolute curse puberty was for me. I would never go back. It's either 1986 or 1987. I'm somewhere between 11 and 12 years old, and I'm living still in Moore, Oklahoma. Now, my family's about to completely uproot without us knowing about it, and within 2 weeks, move to Phoenix, Arizona to follow a healing evangelist named Edgar Bailey. That's another whole episode, but it's relevant to this to give an idea of how transitional the time really was for me. Like I said, I'm about 11, 12 years old, and I'm the youngest of three. I'm living in this immensely over-the-top spiritual demon. You know, if you've listened to this show at all, you already know. Everything has just been so sensationalized at this point. I've already been watching and hearing about, demons and deliverance and exorcisms, and every single day hearing my mom scream and yell at my dad around anything of a sexual nature. And so I want to kind of explain a little bit what my life and my childhood was like growing up, specifically around sex and even more specifically around masturbating. And so just to give a little bit of background, some things took place when I was really, really young. My very first memory is of my father being arrested. And while that brought a great deal of shame onto, my mom and my dad, and all these years past that, there was always screaming and arguing and fighting about all these things that had happened between my mom and my dad when I was younger, and I never knew what it was. And I'd love to give a quick piece of advice. If you are going to choose the parenting style, this is sarcasm, of airing out all of your problems in front of your kids, and doing it in a hostile way with screaming and yelling and name calling and jabs and insults and then passive aggressive pouting and all the shit. If you're going to do all that in front of your kids, one thing you should know is that your children's imagination is still fully intact. Unless you have actively destroyed it, it's really powerful. And what you are not telling them, in their mind, they're going to imagine something far worse than what the truth is, 99% of the time. And so for us kids, I'll speak only for myself, but I did have conversations with my brother and sister along these lines. We grew up not knowing what the big sin was, what the big deal was. But my mom would always talk about how my dad had opened our family up to a curse because of his perversion, because of his choices, because of these things. Now, again, you have to remember, I was not an adult. I was growing up in this. I knew nothing different. So this was the norm that we all learned from our parents. And so I'm absorbing, as any kid does, a lot of information, such as sex equals a curse, or God is more mad about sex and your sexuality than anything else, because at the same time, I'm watching people basically steal money, fake healings, lie out their ass all day, every day, fake, pretend, and all this. But man, when it came to anything of a sexual nature, it just seemed like that's where God completely drew the line. And this was all before I hit puberty. Now, just so you understand, and a lot of people have always thought that this was exaggeration when I tell the story. And I often try to find ways to prove my stories, just not that so many people don't believe them, but just to keep everybody understanding that this was a reality. It's not just funny storytelling. It was my life, and it's really is millions of people's lives every day. And for me, growing up, we often, all five of us, would be in the living room watching TV. This was pre Netflix, Hulu, all of that. We didn't ever have cable of any sort. To this day, my parents have never had a computer with the internet in their house. So we were watching channel 4, 5, 8, 11, 21, 33. That was pretty much it. And then I think 58, which was TBN, which, fuck, brutal. TBN, if you don't know it, Trinity Broadcasting Network. Paul and Jan Crouch, I believe both of them, who are the founders, have passed away, and their son, Matt Crouch, has taken over the network. So what it is today is a lot different. When I was younger, it was pretty crazy. I encourage you to look up some stuff from the 80s of TBN, 80s, Jan Crouch, and just get ready. Anyway, that's a whole other episode, one I should write down. The point is that we would be watching TV, and this is a legitimate example. So, any kind of commercial, any kind of TV where a girl showed any kind of cleavage. So we would be watching something really perverted and risky, like Bonanza. Yes, I'm serious. And the love interest, would come out, and you got to remember, that Bonanza Gunsmoke era, they're dealing with saloon girls, stuff like that. And so my dad would sit with his hand holding the remote control in his hand. I still do it to this day if I'm not careful. And the minute any kind of female, if she had big boobs, even if they were covered, if they were large boobs, or if they were any form of boob, but you could see like the top cleavage. And man, I'm talking about the top 10 percentile, nothing exciting, like the average cleavage that any female on this planet is probably going to have. My dad would immediately look away and turn the TV. And if he didn't fast enough, then my mom would catch on. And this would go on through anything, any form of movies, any form of TV. I remember one year, I don't know if you will remember the Hanes underwear commercials where it would show like a dad in his whitey tighties and his little son in his whitey tighties running around. By the time that commercial came out, to my parents' defense, not that they thought that there was something perverted or wrong with that, but they were so programmed, they were so trained to immediately turn the channel if you saw anything. That I remember my dad, he didn't have the controller in his hand at this time. I remember him and my mom scrambling to get the controller when a Hanes underwear commercial came on. And it was so bizarre because by that time, I think I was a teenager, and I remember thinking, nobody in this room is having a problem with the dad and his little son in their whitey tighties, So what would happen is, the reason that behavior was that way is we would be driving down the street, all three of us kids in the back seat. I was always in the middle, being the youngest. No seat belts. Give me a break. No phones, no anything. You're just sitting in the back, and the family's actually having to talk to each other while you're driving around. And if my dad happened to look to his right or to his left at a car, and if there was a woman in there that even remotely my mom thought was attractive of any sort, what would happen is, if she was really pissed off, she would immediately start slapping him on the arm, hitting him, physically hitting him. Most of the time it was with her old ass wood brush. She would beat the living shit out of my dad with this wood brush. Many men probably would have popped her and knocked her out of the car at that point. Not that that would be right, but I was always amazed at how much physical abuse my dad was willing to take. None of that is positive. That's all fucked, right? So you don't even need to make any judgments on the way I'm talking about it. It was all screwed up. So if my mom was in a little bit of a more mild mood, then we would be driving and she'd be like, out of nowhere, just dead quiet. We're sitting there. My brother, sister, and I are kind of talking, whispering to each other. And my mom would be like, "You like those big cow tits? You like those tits?" It was always like really crass, really graphic, and it was always just so over the top and gross. And my dad, depending on what mood he was in, he'd be like, "Linda, I mean, come on, whatever." So I grew up in this environment. And as I got older and older and older, everyone just learned there was nothing that was going to set my mom off more than, a swimsuit in a movie or something like that. Now, you have to understand that I was raised that pornography is pretty much anything that causes you to find someone attractive, which is really problematic considering we're designed to be attracted. Like that was, if you are a Judeo-Christian, your God designed us to be this way. This was really one of the ways that I started developing this concept that God was always setting traps for us. And it was constantly confusing, and it was that huge contradiction that finally led me to the life that I live today. This idea that God would give you desires and then set in front of you a lifetime of having to wrestle and fight and run from those desires. That never made sense to me. Mostly because I would never fucking do that to anyone, even my own worst enemy. I mean, if you think about it, in a lot of ways, it really is kind of the single best revenge plot. Like, you hate someone's ass so bad that while they're asleep, you're going to give them a desire that is going to drive them all the time. It's a part of who they are. It's in their evolution. If you're a Christian listening to this, don't trip your shit. I don't mean evolution as in God didn't make us. I mean the process that your God would have had to have made built into humans for us to continue to grow. It's there for a reason. So is that reason just to torment and to torture? It never made sense to me. So back to the parent dynamic. I cannot tell you, I really have downplayed this in a lot of other episodes. It's still early on. I mean, this is just episode 6. But I cannot tell you how much this was a day-to-day present conversation, no matter what. If my dad did not jump fast enough to turn the TV from whatever goofy-ass commercial it was, then it wasn't just bad enough that maybe he was lusting over somebody in a one-piece swimming suit who's walking around talking about probiotics helping their stomach. I mean, you got to be a serious perv for that to be your thing. But whatever, no judgment. But if my dad didn't jump fast enough, it didn't just go to you're a pervert, you like seeing chicks in bathing suits, which whatever. It would go to, well, look, you're training your boys how to be pigs. My mom always talked about how men are pigs. Men are pigs. Men are pigs. I grew up hearing men are pigs. I swear to God, it seemed like it was every day. Surely that's not the case. But all day, every day, it felt to me as a kid growing up like my mom constantly talked about what pieces of shit men were. Men were pigs. And that was always connected to any form of attraction to a female. So, growing up for me, until puberty started coming around, it was just like, hey, seems like to me this is something I need to stay away from. Like, girls have cooties, I guess. Now, I always want to try and do a really fair job to my parents. Not that a lot of the stuff they did wasn't batshit crazy, but they were trying to do it in a right way, which is part of the insanity, right? So my mom, on the turn of this, the other side of this, men are pigs, men are shit, men are this, men are that. My dad, who, was such a hero for me growing up, still is to this day in many ways. It just seemed like such a horrible, toxic, like it was the worst curse on humanity. Like there's demons, and demons are going to use sex as much as they can, more than anything, because that is the single biggest sin in all of humanity, right? So, growing up in this environment, it was my dad training us to be, good men by jumping and grabbing a remote and turning it, and that's the respectful thing to do. And my mom would, call everyone piece of shit. But then she would turn around and in an extreme opposite, I don't know other parents that do this part either, she would sit down with my brother and I. Now, my brother's 5 years older than me, so there was considerable age difference. Excuse me, I needed some water. But so I remember her doing that with my brother and I a few times, but then it was just really she would talk to me, not in a creepy sexual way. It wasn't inappropriate in that sense. It was always in the open around other people. There was nothing pervy necessarily. But my mom would turn around and talk to me in immense detail about how to treat women. And when I was younger, that started off with the things like opening doors and, being respectful and always serving the female first. And, ironically, a lot of things that a lot of ladies today lose their shit over and don't want. And I actively run into that. Like, well, I'll open a door for someone, or I'll go out of my way to run up and grab a door for a lady. And most of the time they're nice about it. I mean, I live in the South, so it's still a thing. But I have had multiple women, scour at me and just kind of look at me like I'm a piece of shit. Or I've had a few women say something like, I can get my own door. Thanks. And I'm like, sorry. So, I was raised around that. But as I got older, my mom actually started talking to me about sex. And she trained me and taught me, now at 44 years old, looking around my friends and people I've known, including females, I honestly think my mom did the best job of anybody I know teaching me about sex, sexuality to an extent, but really intimacy between a couple. My mom talked to me at length about body hygiene all the time, all the time. I know grown-ass women whose moms have never talked to them once about hygiene. Not once. My mom talked to me about it so much that when I would go to the bathroom when I was a teenager, I would come out of the bathroom. My mom, very lovingly, seemed totally normal, would be like, see, now this is one of those times where if it's at night and you think there might be some intimacy, you should probably just take a quick shower, or you could use a rag. And she would like break down what I later found out people jokingly referred to as a whore's bath. Jesus. It was just really weird. And my mom would talk to me about technique. My mom had, drawers full of lingerie. Thank God my mom had Victoria's Secret magazines. For a while, she had Fredericks of Hollywood, which had straight up titties. I don't know if you knew this or not, but the old Fredericks of Hollywood magazine had straight up titties, like full out, wow. I found those one day and had to frame my dad and got him in trouble because I was using that. I need to write that down. That's another story. Sorry, Dad. So anyway, I digress. I grew up in I literally am writing this down. Fred Hollywood. Boobs. Dad. Hope no one finds this note. That's really disturbing. So I was raised in this environment, and there was a lot of pros and a lot of cons. In all seriousness, as I've been an adult, I was married. My first marriage was 10 years, right at 10 years. I've been married now, for 6, going on 7 years. And I had some long-term relationships in between those. I've always been a relationship kind of guy, which would make a lot of sense when you hear a lot of these stories. It has served me very, very well in my adult sex life, in my intimacy, to have been raised that way, to have a mother, not the dad, but a mother that was so open and so honest and so transparent. And honestly, I can't thank her enough. It really is a system where it's a little bit different for me now. I am doing very similar methods with my own kids, to where we are going to talk about sex. We're going to talk about it openly. It's a thing. We're not going to be weird about it. So that's the way that I've evolved that. However, now that I've laid this kind of weird track record, let's go back to 1986, 1987. I'm 11. I'm 12 years old. I like doing this because I measured the world always by movies. I've always been a movie junkie. Became a TV junkie later, as TV became, in many ways, almost better than movies today. But I remember my childhood largely by movies, not because I was allowed to go see these movies, but because they were the movies that people were talking about, and there was always this magic around it. So, I mean, 1986, you got to understand that's Labyrinth, that's Dundee, if that was your thing, that's Pretty in Pink. But here's what's crazy, man. 1987 was an unbelievably good year for movies for me. Predator, Princess Bride, Lethal Weapon, RoboCop, Untouchables, Evil Dead 2, Full Metal Jacket, and of course, Raising Freaking Arizona. Are you kidding me? Not to mention Dirty Dancing, Good Morning Vietnam, Fatal Attraction. Yes, I'm reading these. It was an amazing year for movies. So I'm 11, I'm 12 years old, and of course, I don't remember the initial stages, but let's just say I started playing with my business at 11 years old. Now, most boys that I know are always playing with their junk, from the time that they're born. I mean, my son to this day is constantly grabbing his business. He's 5, and we're having to tell him, hey, when you're in public, probably not a good time to be playing with your wang. But for me, man, right around 11, I started realizing that, dude, just with a few, just look at it different, and I would start feeling this weird sensation. And one of the things that I want to talk about in this, I'm going to be very vulnerable. I'm going to share some things I've never shared with anyone other than a therapist who was helping me understand how trauma works. But at a very young age, way prepubescent, way before puberty and all that good stuff, I had connected anxiety and stress to arousal. And there's a term for this that I need to call one of my therapist buddies around, where you learn to arouse yourself by forcing yourself to procrastinate. So when I was in second grade, I'm in Oklahoma City. I'm going to a school. There's a lot of stories there. But I developed this weird thing. So you go to recess. I'm in, I think, first grade. You go to recess, and a buddy of mine named Marcus would always run with me. He would show me how to run. He would take his shoes off to teach me you could run faster without your shoes on. Thank you, Marcus. And so what would happen is we'd be outside playing, and we had a 2-bell system. There was the first bell that meant stop your shit, get in line, we're going to go in. And then the second bell, at that point, you're supposed to be in single file line, and then you walk in smelling like a puppy dog and all that good stuff. Well, what I developed, when that first bell would ring, everybody starts going, kind of casually up to the school to go in. I would tear ass running all the way through the playground, all the way out to the fields. We were one of those schools that had all the fields in the back part of the playground. As far as I could go, and there were soccer goals, and I would climb the soccer goal and stay up there until the second bell rang, jump down, and run for my life to get in line in time. And I would always miss it. My teacher would always get pissed, and this is another story that I'll tell at another time, and she would spank me publicly in front of the classroom, and she did it every single day, and I didn't care. I would continue. So here's what was really happening. I was growing up in a very weird, by any therapist standards I've ever talked to, abusive environment. There's a lot of strange stuff going on, and for some reason, I learned that by procrastinating, waiting to the very last minute, it would give me a sense of arousal. I would literally feel tingles and all that stuff. Well, what I didn't know is then I would run, heightening the experience, get there, get yelled at, and get spanked in front of the whole classroom, developing all kinds of interesting sexual ideas for later in my life. And so, I had always had this sense of arousal. And growing up, before puberty, I would find all of these weird ways to trigger this sense of arousal that flushed, feeling naughty, hiding, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that is, come to find out, very normal, very healthy for young people to do. You're experimenting, you're learning your body. I am a huge believer in that. That'll be very obvious when this podcast is over. But just so you have to have an understanding of how bizarrely packed my sexual identity was by the time I even hit 11 years old. So 11 hits, and I don't remember how or why somebody had said something, but I discovered the subtle art of hiding in the bathroom and masturbating. And the first couple of times, I do remember freaking out, literally crying, praying, asking for God to forgive me, asking for God to cleanse me. I'm such a pervert. Now, any rational adult that's listening to this, if you have children or if you desire to have children, I want you to imagine this. Imagine you have an 11-year-old son and you walk by the bathroom and you could hear them in there crying, praying for God to forgive them, begging God for mercy to not let demons of lust enter into your soul, this kind of stuff. I mean, it it would end everything in your life if you heard that. Not that I'm saying that my parents heard it. Just imagine your son or your daughter even thinking that way at 11 years old. So as life progressed, I was always a huge G.I. Joe fan, man. I mean, a psycho G.I. Joe fan. So I'm in that weird transition that makes everyone uncomfortable, especially in America. And that is you're playing with toys and then you're going in the bathroom jerking off and then you're coming back out playing with toys. And that is that transition time period that we're just now really starting to see shows dedicated to. I love this genre. I love shows like Pen 15 on Hulu. If you haven't seen it, it is incredible. Big Mouth on Netflix. It's an animated show that shows people when they start puberty, they get a monster, a hormone monster. Not to mention it's from some of the greatest minds in comedy, Nick Kroll, several other guys. But I love these kind of shows that talk and show the freaking unbelievable awkwardness of that time period. And I really think it's important for our kids, if you can find ones that aren't so raunchy for your kids, for them to understand that puberty is, without a doubt, the single worst time period of my entire life. I would not go back to fucking puberty if somebody gave me $2 million. I'm telling you, I wouldn't do it. Now, maybe if you didn't grow up in a crazy religious home, maybe it's different. But it was such a curse for me because as the days went on, I became obviously more and more and more obsessed with masturbating. And here's what happened. If a guy and his little son in their whitey-tighties laying on a couch together is perversion, the idea of jerking your business until you come is unimaginable. All right? It is the single most frightening idea that you would get caught, that things would happen. And from this point forward, I will probably have, when it's all said and done, 60 podcasts around my sexuality, puberty, and growing up the way I did. By the time I tell all the stories, it's easily the biggest story element of my childhood, especially my teen years. And so, here the thing that cracked me up about masturbating, I'm just now getting to the actual masturbation part. It was a curse. You are not supposed to do it in any way at all. And so I think I remember, we had moved to Allen at this point, and so I'm in fifth, maybe sixth grade. I think fifth grade at this point, and I had been kind of masturbating here and there, not sure what's going on. I just because it's in my nature. I don't want to be too graphic, but the early days of masturbating is very strange, even from just a physicality standpoint. I mean, you just don't even know what the hell is happening. But I started kind of getting the hang of it, had started getting like a technique down, and I remember living in Allen, Texas, on a street, Wandering Way, ironically enough, and being in the bathroom, just finishing a toe curling experience and saying in my mind, I remember this, I swear to God, I'm not lying. I remember in my mind dedicating my life to masturbating kind of the way I would dedicate my life to Jesus. Like, okay, that is the greatest thing I think I've ever experienced. And there is no way I'm ever going to stop doing that. I remember that thought so clearly. Like, okay, I'm going to straight up do a cannonball right into hell because I'm not stopping that. That was amazing. I'll take that every day, maybe 4 or 5 times a day. And so from that point forward, dude, it became an obsession. Now, obviously, I believe people can be sexually addicted. I know of people who have been addicted to masturbating where they can't go to work because they can't stop jerking off. And guys, I got to tell you, I got pretty close. There are times in my life, even when I was an adult, in work environments, which I'll do podcast on that, where it just became such a part of my life. And I didn't realize how big of a part of my life it had been until I was an adult sitting with therapists and they were explaining to me, yeah, it's like self-soothing. So for like a regular dude who just wants to fuck as much as he can, jerking off is a necessity. It's a sanity measurement. For me and people that are raised in trauma, it's that plus self-identification, plus self-soothing, plus acceptance, plus. It becomes a major part that you're making up for things that you aren't getting in the home environment that you should be getting. So, man, it started a lifetime. I mean, I remember getting in trouble jerking off in classrooms. The craziness that I went through, some of these stories I've already told, but I talked to all my guy friends. They all went through it. And many females went through it, just a different version. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the amount of creativity and desperation that went into finding things that I could put my dick into. Stuffed animals. I chiseled out holes in the wall before I understood what fiberglass was. That is a true story. I remember jerking off with sea breeze. Sea breeze! If you don't know what sea breeze is, it was like, I think the original, what do they call that? Astringent that you would use on your face at night, and it would like set your face on fire. Toothpaste, cantaloupes. Oh, I loved cantaloupes. I mean, the list went on and on and on. The creativity had no end. I would cut a hole on the edge of my bed so I could bang into the bed. It just became all consuming. In the meantime, I had no one to talk to about any of this. And I didn't have anybody telling me, all right, look, a certain amount of this is human behavior. A certain amount of this is hormones where you are being driven insane. And, you watch these shows, you kind of remember your childhood, but you do start to forget that once puberty hits, it's like an out-of-body experience. You're walking through school, and the people that you were running around playing tag with 2 days ago, or again, we're back to that weird playing with toys, jerking off transition. One minute you're writing poems. I was a cheesy romantic nerd. One minute you're writing poems and planning things for someone that you are in love with, and you just want to spend the rest of your life with Jennifer. And next thing you know, she's walking down the hall and you have instant boner because you think you saw a boob jiggle or something like that. It's the smell of girls' hair would just completely destroy me. And I'm sitting in class. I'm not listening. I'm not hearing anything, man. I'm trying to control my mind. I have a very creative mind. To this day, I feel at times I've been cursed with just such an imagination. So it was just like a plague. It was like a disease. It's like I had contracted a disease around 11. It didn't really start getting bad until, 12 and a half, 13. And then I was full-blown terminal horny at 13 years old. And from that point forward, the amount of attention that I started finding around masturbating, because I was getting older, so churches start talking about it based on your age, youth groups. And it was made extremely clear to me that by masturbating, that is one of the fastest, easiest ways to actually allow a demon to enter into your body. Now, I know that's a little extra special than even a lot of what I've talked about, but it was explained to me in this way, and that is when you touch yourself and when you have an orgasm and something leaves your body, something has to return back. Science? Fuck it. We'll just make up some cool shit. So something has to return back. And there's a scripture where, if you cast a demon out and you don't clean and sweep the room, then that demon will come back with 3 or 4 of its buddies stronger than him. There's a version of that in the Bible, which is, there's a lot of things I could say there. So I started hearing this teaching. So every time I would masturbate, I would then have to pray in tongues, plead the blood of Jesus over me. So I started getting this interesting, like, religious, supernatural, sexual overtone. And for those of you who didn't grow up in any of this, it's probably really weird for you to imagine people who, are priests or ministers and all the sexual stuff that happens with them. That is a direct result, I can say with all fucking confidence, of taking a system that God made and perverting it, twisting it, keeping people from being able to express their sexuality that God gave them. It is going to pervert. It is going to turn dark. And you are going to engage mentally first with whoever you have access to. Fortunately for me, I was not raised in a priest environment. That's more Catholicism, exorcism. I was raised evangelical in the sense that, you could be married, but anything outside of marriage was just unquestionable. It's horrible. You're never supposed to masturbate. You're never supposed to mess around. You sure as hell don't have sex before you're married. Then the whole program came out of why wait, which I always loved how that was a question, because that's like a really good fucking question. Anyway, it goes on and on and on, but I was being taught that if you come, you have the opportunity for a demon to basically swim up through your dick into your soul. Maybe I misunderstood that as a kid. Maybe they weren't saying it was like one of these parasites in the Amazon that'll swim up your business if you like pee into the river or whatever. But that is certainly how I heard it. That is how I believed it for a long, long time. So after I had finished my business, I would have hours, if not days, of fear that I had picked something up. And I was smart enough to know that it wasn't going to be sensationalized like it is, in movies, where all of a sudden I felt this like burning sensation going up my business, and I'm like, I'm on fire. So that led to the suspicion because it would take a few days. So if I got sick over the next couple of days, if I had an unusually bad day at school, because most days at school really sucked, but if I had an unusually bad one, if anything had happened, then I started connecting those dots. And I grew up in a way to connect things that had nothing to do with each other, right? So I was always battling this fear of demons coming up through my business, possessing me, at least if I'm not being possessed, because that's how strong the blood of Jesus is that you can plead this blood of Jesus that will remove any demons, but the consequences of your sins are still there. And masturbating and what you're thinking of during masturbating is most definitely a sin. I didn't hear until I was an adult this very basic concept, and it's funny if God didn't want you to touch it, why did he make your arm the exact length as where your dick is? Like, can you maybe shorten up my predominant arm? Or give me a hint. Like, T-Rex never had a masturbation problem. Ever. Pure as hell. So, of course, and look where he is. That's what he got. So, the human behavior, this isn't normal. It started moving from, hey, you should masturbate from time to time. It's good for you to learn about yourself, which is how a healthy parent would raise, all the way over to, oh my God, I think I have a sore throat because I jerked off the other day and a demon swam up my dick and is now fucking with my throat. This is a curse. And yes, I believed that, as embarrassing as to say. So as I'm getting older and older and just possessed almost, I use that term jokingly on purpose, but it did feel at times, as it does with every young man, that I was possessed with this drive, man, this drive to see, to smell, to touch, like just the senses were on fire for me, man. And with that came constant fear. Everywhere I went, I heard about marriages being destroyed because of pornography, children being raped, molested, all these horrible things. And so let me end this podcast with telling you one specific story. There is a, quote, ministry. I'm doing bunny ears in case, you can see me. They're called Pure Life Ministries. You can find them online. They are, I will tell you in 2 seconds. Clever. purelifeministries.org. They're still functioning. They're still around. And I can tell you all of these years back, when I was a teenager. I can't tell you for sure if it was the same Pure Life Ministries, but this Pure Life Ministries that I'm looking at online specializes in helping people with sexual addiction, leading Christians into purity since 1986. So it had to be them. So my parents, being pastors, they had a home office. And in that home office, they would have just tons and tons and tons of Christian books, both, study books like, lexicons and the Strong's Coordinates and things like that to look up the original Hebrew and Greek and all that. But then my parents were really big, specifically my mom. They were really big into something that was fairly new coming on at the time called pastoral counseling. I have seen pastoral counseling destroy more people than probably any other thing. And that is, I have a pastor, I have a problem, marriage, children, work, whatever. Instead of me going to a trained therapist, instead of me going to someone maybe with a PhD or something like that, someone that at least there's some regulation of what they can and cannot teach, I'm going to go to my pastor and I will get my counseling from them. So all of these pastors who their intention is really to preach the word and to lead people in further into dedication to the things of the Lord, they began filling up their days with counseling sessions. And so they would have 6, 7, 8 hours straight of a married couple coming in crying, then a mom coming in with their son crying. And these pastors were taking counseling courses from pastoral counseling courses. And my mom had bookcases full of this stuff. Bookcases full. I mean, predominantly around marriage, which makes sense because my mom and my dad's marriage was really not good. So laying there on my mom's desk is this pamphlet, trifold, and it says Pure Life Ministries on it. And it has all these buzzwords on it. If you remember this time period of design, this was really common. There was like the word lust, there was the word masturbation, there was the word pornography, there was the word addiction. So I remember going in there and picking that up, and there was a phone number, and I saw it. So I decided to pray and really seek the face of God around my masturbation issue. And what I felt I heard was to call Pure Life Ministry. So the next time my parents were gone from the house, I went in there, used the same phone that I had used for 1-900 numbers. If you haven't heard that story, it's in the interview, episode 1, where I interview a longtime neighbor and friend, Sean Hagewood. But I got pretty crazy around the 1-900 number phase. So, but back on track, I call, and a man answers the phone, Pure Life Ministries, and I'm like, look, now guys, I think I'm 14 at this point. And he's like, how can I help you? And it's very serious. Very, very serious. And I'm talking to him on the phone. I'm like, well, I really masturbate a lot. I don't seem to think I could stop. It's all I think about. Right? The very first thing this guy said to me, not at the end, actually, it doesn't matter where he would have said it. It would have been wrong, but it is what he led with. He said, young man, this is very dangerous because every man that has ever raped a woman first started by masturbating. And you need to get in here. You need to get down here. Do your parents know that you're calling? And I freaked out. It scared me so bad I hung up, especially when he started talking about my parents. And so I hung up the phone, freaked the fuck out for a long time. But here what was planted in my mind. The more sexually expressive you are, the more dangerous, predatorial of a path you're going to be on. It never crossed my mind that basically what he just said was, hey, every single person that's ever had a drinking and driving accident and killed people, it all started with them getting a driver's license. That's basically the fucking equivalent, but I didn't think of that at 14. So it scared me to death, and it just continued to compound this fear. Now, from that point forward, it only got worse. I started getting called out in youth groups, summer camps. For whatever reason, I was the go-to, this guy needs prayer, jerk-off poster boy. I will tell you, in all honesty, if you've listened to my podcast at all, you know I'm pretty transparent. I don't really have a problem telling ridiculous shit about myself. I can tell you as an adult, looking back, I was not addicted to masturbating. I was a teenager that needed to procreate and had discovered a way to comfort and soothe myself in a house where there was constant trauma, screaming, yelling. It was horrific. And so for me, this became almost like a parallel religion. There was what I believed, that there was one way to heaven, and it was Jesus, and anything outside of that, you're walking just with like one foot in hell. Demons are gnashing at you, and it was my job to save as many of those people as possible. On the other side was the religion of self-care, self-soothing, loving myself, amazing feeling, developing my imagination, especially sexually, and they began to run parallel. And that was disastrous. It was absolutely disastrous, especially because later on I became a teen minister, and you're not allowed to mess with anybody. During that time, I had phone sex with a girl. I remember grabbing another girl completely inappropriately. If I can ever find her, I still need to apologize to her. I never had sex. I mean, I was a virgin when I got married. I wasn't messing around with girls. I wasn't being the slimy pastor, then, stand up in the pulpit and then go bang a bunch of chicks. Those situations happened when I honestly lost my shit and could not control myself physically. Doesn't make it right, makes it 100% wrong. I take full responsibility for it. But that is what happens when you live in such an oppressed environment around something that is totally natural. If you're listening to this, you know good and well that from the ages of 12 or 13 until about 19 to 21, you know that guys are out of their fucking minds with chemicals. And if you've never looked at this, you need to research the way God, if you're a Christian, your God, designed it. These chemicals that are dumping into young men, young women, that was his design, and it's for a reason. And we have perverted this. Of course, I'm not saying go around teaching your kids to bang it out with everybody they want. And that is what I'll close with, is the ridiculous comparison that I always heard, as if there was no middle ground. As if I can't talk to my kid about, all right, look, you got a penis. It's awesome. It feels great. You're going to want to play with it. You need to do that in the privacy of your room. Here's how you clean up. You better not let your mom find your sock. That's when we're going to have a problem. If you have any questions, you need to come to me. I'll talk to you about it. Look, are you rubbing it so much that it's getting raw? Hey, ding dong, here's a process. It's called lotion. Or walk your kids through this stuff. And if you don't want to do that, I don't know why you had kids, man. I've never understood this idea that we're going to have kids, and then the things that are the most private, the most important in their lives, we're going to ignore because it makes us uncomfortable. Don't be a fucking pussy. You made these humans. They need to hear from you. And by the way, they aren't excited that you're going to talk to them about it. But if you will do it, and if you'll do it in a loving and kind of humorous way and let them know early on, you don't have a say in this. We're going to talk about this. So I didn't grow up in that environment, which I think is pretty healthy. I grew up in an environment that it was constant disease. Everybody in this world is looking to rape and murder women and children because they used to masturbate. Because you see a girl on TV, because some girl's running and her boobs are bouncing and you're like, oh shit, I like those things. I was designed to like those things. That was the intention. I didn't sign up for it. I didn't have a checkbox. I like boobs. I don't like boobs. It wasn't up to me. And so it's not up to your children. Everybody needs to calm down. And right towards the end, when I was a youth pastor, I started teaching when we had to have our forced men's meetings. They would split up the youth group so girls could talk and boys would talk. And I'm looking at all these boys just destroyed with shame. Shame, man, let me tell you, nothing generates perversion faster than shame. Shame is the key to any true form of perversion. So to me, telling them, hey, look, you need to be careful what you're thinking about. You need to be careful what you're watching. You need to be careful. But masturbating is something that you're supposed to be doing. And I can tell you this, as an adult, I know several people who, of course, you'll know I'm talking largely about females, but I know several males that grew up and did not masturbate because of the belief systems we grew up in. And those same people to this day struggle with their sex. And there is a difference between sex, which is penetration, and sexuality, which is the energy and the thought process and the communication and the planning and the thinking and the intimacy. All of that falls around sexuality. And people that grew up not even able to masturbate, not even able to enjoy their own body, forget the fact that they're not allowed to even really kiss or touch anybody else, which I tend to believe is a healthy part of the process. Is it scary? Yes. Do I want my kids to do it? No. Do they need to? Yes. Parenting sucks. It's not fun a lot of the time, but we need to walk them through this so when they're on the other side of it, they are as healthy as possible. And I grew up watching people, if you are not masturbating when you're a kid, when you're a teenager, and if it's because of fear, if you're not just because you're not interested, fine, that's totally different. If it's from fear, if you're having to struggle and keep yourself from masturbating, dude, that kid is going to be fucked up when they get grown up. They are going to have a hard time with intimacy and being physical with other people. If you cannot love your body, you are not going to allow someone else to love your body, and you're not going to know how to love someone else's body. Now, that's just practical human behavior, like human sexuality 101. Go take it at any community college. They're going to teach you that. For me, growing up in this environment, I think what saved me from a lot of twisted perversion, I mean, all jokes aside, I've had many people say, I am surprised that you are not gay, because I grew up in a house where there was so much men hating and bashing, but I was being taught to by the same person about intimacy and sex about, all the time. I've also had people say, I don't understand how you aren't like a deep perv. Now, I'm a very sexual person. I'm very transparent about that. I don't see any shame in that. I'm very creative when it comes to sex. I like to create environments. It's not just, hey, let's go in our bedroom and bang it out. All right, we check that for the week. However, I don't think that I would have been as healthy as I am had I not been able to get around some young adults who were basically kind of winking at me like, dude, all this is a little bit ridiculous. There were some young adults that were like 23, 24 when I was around 16, 17 years old. And I'll never forget, I was at a home group meeting. The home group meeting had finished. Most of the people had gone home, and they were talking about purity because that was what we had been told we had to talk about. And, they're kind of cleaning up, and they're like, look, Damien, everybody makes this a much bigger deal than what it is. You're supposed to enjoy yourself sexually. That was it. Just that one little intervention that they didn't even mean. They didn't know how I was being raised. That right there planted enough of a seed that I think I was able to keep away from any really twisted, horrible perversion. I don't even really have any crazy fetishes that I know of. For me, Pure Life Ministries, calling that place, hearing them tell me that I am basically on the path of becoming a rapist or a serial rapist, and the only way to fix it was to go spend weeks at their place, which if you get a chance to check out their website, you might agree with it, you might not. They have a 9-month residential program, which I would assume at that point, if you're going somewhere for 9 months because of sex, that you are a child molester, you are a rapist, and I would agree with that level of intervention. They also have a 12-week at-home program. They have programs for wives who are having to recover not from their sexual sin, but from their husband's sexual sin, which is always fascinating, and I've experienced a lot there. And then just maybe watch some of their videos, because I don't want to make fun of these people. When you watch these videos and they're talking, they're serious. They really mean it. But you have to understand that this was their reality within their echo chamber. They're not exposed to anything other than their own church's teaching of one book, the Bible. And as phenomenal as a book that is, the scriptures are, the way that it's being taught in that echo chamber, you see grown men on here talking about, when they were young, they started escalating from masturbating to watching something on the internet. Yeah, no shit. Of course you are. Then they're like, and then it got really serious, and I was running straight home from school and masturbating. Of course you are. Of course you are. That was not a sign that you needed to go spend 12 weeks or 9 months or whatever the fuck it takes to make yourself right. Again, I know people that are sex addicts. I know people that have addictions. I am not mocking them. It is extremely real, very legitimate, but not everybody that feels the need to masturbate is an addict and needs to go spend time. They sure as hell aren't going to become fucking serial rapists. Love this episode of Spiritual PTSD Podcast? Head over to iTunes, Spotify, or Google to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's really helpful this early on in our podcast journey. And of course, don't forget to check out our website, spiritualptsd.com, for full interviews, event updates, and to join the conversation. Thank you. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and their guest. All facts and information has been stated as the host and their guest experience them and should not serve as a historical portrayal.